Most people enter a conversation trying to win by speaking more, proving they are right, defending their position, or making sure the other person understands how intelligent they are. But the strongest communicator does not always speak the most. The strongest communicator understands what is happening beneath the words. Listening more than you speak is one of the simplest ways to become more effective in conversation, because people reveal far more when they feel that they are being heard than when they feel that they are being challenged. Many people listen only long enough to prepare their next response. While the other person is speaking, they are already planning how to defend themselves, prove a point, tell a story, or demonstrate their intelligence. Their body may appear quiet, but mentally they are not listening. This creates a major weakness because they miss the information hidden inside the conversation. When you genuinely listen, you begin noticing not only what people say, but how they say it. You notice their tone, pauses, hesitation, confidence, frustration, excitement, and the subjects they repeatedly return to. These details can reveal priorities that their words alone may not communicate. Someone may claim that they are completely comfortable with a decision while repeatedly defending it without being asked. That defensiveness may tell you more than the decision itself. Another person may say they are not interested in recognition while constantly mentioning their achievements. Careful listening allows you to notice these patterns without immediately confronting them. The purpose is not to manipulate people, but to understand them accurately. The more you understand, the more intelligently you can respond. Silence is an important part of this process. You do not need to fill every pause. When you remain quiet after someone finishes speaking, they may continue talking because they feel there is still space to explain themselves. People often reveal their real thoughts after the first answer. The first response may be rehearsed or socially acceptable, while the second or third explanation contains more honesty. If you interrupt too quickly, you may never hear it. This is why patience can become a communication advantage. You are allowing information to come towards you instead of constantly pushing your own information outward. Listening also reduces unnecessary conflict. Imagine someone criticizes you. Your immediate instinct may be to defend yourself, but if you listen completely, you may discover that the criticism contains a legitimate concern mixed with emotion. If you interrupt immediately, you may argue against something they were never actually saying. By listening first, you can separate the useful information from the emotional noise. You can then respond to the real issue instead of fighting against your assumptions. Good listening also makes people feel respected. Most people want to feel that their thoughts matter. When someone realizes that you are genuinely paying attention, they become more open. They may share concerns, motivations, ideas, or information they would not reveal to someone who constantly interrupts. This creates trust without requiring you to perform or impress them. You are not trying to become the most interesting person in the conversation. You are creating enough space for the other person to reveal themselves naturally. Another advantage is that listening protects you from speaking impulsively. The more you speak without thinking, the more information you accidentally reveal. You may expose your insecurities, plans, emotions, weaknesses, or assumptions. Sometimes you can damage your position simply because you felt uncomfortable with silence. Listening allows you to gather information before deciding what should be shared. It gives you time to understand the situation and choose your words carefully. This is particularly valuable during negotiations, disagreements, interviews, or important personal conversations. You should also listen for what is not being said. People sometimes avoid certain subjects, change the topic, become unusually quiet, or use vague language when something matters to them. These patterns do not automatically prove deception, but they are signals worth noticing. Observation should replace assumption. Do not decide immediately why someone behaved a certain way. Instead, gather more information, ask thoughtful questions, watch whether their actions remain consistent with their words. Listening becomes powerful when combined with patience and curiosity. Ask yourself, what is this person actually trying to communicate? Rather than, how can I prove that I am right? That shift changes the entire conversation. You become less interested in winning a verbal battle and more interested in understanding reality. You may discover that some disagreements disappear once both people feel heard. You may discover that some people reveal their own contradictions without you exposing them. You may discover that the best response becomes obvious only after you have allowed the other person to finish speaking. Speaking less does not make you weak or passive. It gives your words greater purpose. When you finally speak, your response is based on information rather than impulse. You have listened, observed, considered, and then chosen your words. This makes communication clearer and more deliberate. The person who listens carefully is often the person who understands the room most accurately, because while everyone else is competing to be heard, they are quietly collecting the information that allows them to respond with precision, control the pace of a conversation. Because the speed at which you speak, pause, listen, and respond can influence how others perceive your confidence and emotional control. Many people rush through conversations because they are afraid of silence. They feel that every pause must be filled immediately, every question must receive an instant answer, and every disagreement must be addressed before the other person can speak again. This creates unnecessary pressure and often causes people to say more than they intended. When you slow down, you create space between stimulus and response. That space allows you to think clearly instead of reacting automatically. A deliberate pause can make your words more precise because you have taken a moment to understand what was actually said. If someone asks you a difficult question, you do not have to answer within 1 second simply because they expect it. Take a moment, consider what information is relevant, what needs to be said, and what does not need to be revealed. This is especially useful when someone is trying to pressure you. Pressure often works by creating urgency. When you feel that you must answer immediately, you may accept conditions you would normally question or make promises you cannot keep. Slowing the conversation reduces that pressure. You regain the ability to evaluate rather than react. The pace of your voice matters as well. Speaking too quickly can make you appear nervous even when you are confident. Speaking at a measured pace can make your communication easier to understand and can signal that you are comfortable with your own words. This does not mean speaking unnaturally slowly or trying to create an artificial impression. It means removing unnecessary rushing. Let important sentences breathe. Give people time to process what you have said. A conversation is not a race to see who can produce the most words. It is an exchange of information, emotion, and meaning. Another powerful aspect of controlling pace is allowing the other person to experience silence. When you ask a question, do not immediately rescue them if they take time to answer. People often need a few seconds to organize their thoughts. If you interrupt the silence with another question or explanation, you may prevent them from giving their real answer. Sometimes people continue speaking simply because you remain quiet. They clarify their position, reveal additional information, or correct themselves. You learn more by giving them space. Silence can therefore become part of the conversation rather than an uncomfortable gap. The same principle applies when someone becomes aggressive. If they raise their voice and you automatically raise yours, the conversation escalates. If they become faster and more emotional while you remain measured, the emotional temperature can decrease. You are not surrendering. You are refusing to let their pace determine yours. This is a form of self-control. You can be firm without becoming frantic. You can disagree without shouting. You can establish a boundary without turning the conversation into a performance. Controlling pace also means knowing when to end a conversation. Some discussions become repetitive because neither person is listening anymore. Continuing simply because you want the final word can waste energy. Sometimes the strongest communication is a clear statement followed by an exit. You do not need to repeat the same argument 10 times to make it valid. If the other person has understood your position and refuses to accept it, more words may accomplish nothing. Recognizing this prevents unnecessary conflict. The deeper principle is that your pace should be chosen according to your purpose. If the situation requires quick action, act quickly. If the situation requires careful thought, slow down. Do not allow another person's urgency, anger, excitement, or anxiety to dictate your rhythm. When you control your pace, you give yourself time to observe, think, and choose. Your communication becomes calmer, your responses become more deliberate, and your words carry greater weight because they are no longer being produced from pressure. Ask questions that reveal motives because good questions can uncover what people actually want, fear, value, or expect without forcing you to make assumptions. Many people focus too much on making statements. They explain their position, defend their opinions, give advice, and attempt to convince others before understanding what is driving the conversation. This creates unnecessary conflict because you may be arguing against a position that is not even the real issue. A carefully chosen question can slow the situation down and expose the deeper concern. When someone strongly rejects an idea, instead of immediately defending it, ask what specifically concerns them. Their answer may reveal that the disagreement is not about the idea itself, but about risk, timing, money, status, trust, or fear of losing control. Once you understand the real concern, you can communicate more effectively. Questions also encourage people to explain themselves in their own words. This provides information that a simple yes or no answer may not reveal. Ask, what makes you see it that way? Or what outcome are you hoping for? Or what would make this work for you? These questions invite explanation rather than confrontation. The purpose is not to interrogate someone or manipulate them. The purpose is to replace assumptions with understanding. One of the greatest communication mistakes is assuming that you already know why another person behaves a certain way. You see someone refuse an opportunity and decide they are lazy. You see someone criticize an idea and decide they are jealous. You see someone remain quiet and decide they are angry, but you may be completely wrong. A question gives reality a chance to correct your assumption. It also demonstrates respect because you are giving the other person an opportunity to explain their perspective. Questions become especially powerful during disagreements. When emotions rise, statements can sound like attacks. You never listen invites defensiveness. A question such as, "What do you think I am missing?" creates a different atmosphere. Instead of forcing the other person into a defensive position, you encourage reflection. This does not guarantee agreement, but it can make productive discussion more likely. Questions can also help you understand what someone values. Imagine negotiating with another person. They reject your proposal, but instead of immediately offering another one, ask what matters most to them. Perhaps their priority is flexibility rather than price. Perhaps they care more about recognition than responsibility. Perhaps they are worried about uncertainty. Once you know the priority, you can focus your communication on the actual issue. Without that information, you may waste time offering solutions that solve the wrong problem. Another useful practice is asking open-ended questions instead of questions designed only to confirm your assumptions. If you ask, "You agree this is the best option, right?" You are not really seeking information. You are seeking agreement. A stronger question is, "How do you see the options?" This allows the other person to reveal their thinking. Listening to the answer is just as important as asking the question. If you ask questions only to wait for your turn to speak, you are not communicating strategically. Listen for repeated words, emotional reactions, contradictions, and concerns. Sometimes the most important information appears in what someone emphasizes repeatedly. Questions can also reveal your own motives. Ask yourself why you are so desperate to convince someone. Are you trying to solve a problem, or are you trying to protect your ego? Are you seeking understanding or simply victory? These questions prevent you from turning every conversation into a competition. The strongest communicator is not the person who has an answer for everything. It is often the person who knows which question to ask next. A good question can uncover information, reduce assumptions, lower defensiveness, and guide the conversation toward what actually matters. When you become skilled at asking questions, you stop trying to control every conversation through statements. You create space for people to reveal their reasoning naturally, and that understanding gives you a clearer foundation for whatever you choose to say or do next. Never react emotionally under pressure, because pressure is often when your judgment matters most. Anyone can appear calm when everything is going well, but difficult conversations reveal whether you truly control yourself. When someone criticizes you, challenges your position, raises their voice, questions your ability, or tries to embarrass you, your first instinct may be to defend yourself immediately. That instinct is natural, but acting on it without thinking can turn a manageable situation into a serious conflict. The moment emotion takes control, your attention moves away from the actual problem and toward protecting your ego. You stop asking what response is useful and start asking how to make the other person feel what you are feeling. This is where conversations become destructive. Anger wants immediate expression. Confidence allows patience. The ability to pause before responding gives you an advantage because it prevents temporary emotions from making permanent decisions. When pressure rises, take a moment before speaking. Breathe slowly, notice what you are feeling, and identify what actually happened. Ask yourself whether the situation is truly important or whether your pride has simply been touched. Sometimes a person's words hurt because they expose an insecurity rather than because they contain a serious threat. If you can recognize that difference, you become much harder to provoke. Emotional control does not mean allowing people to disrespect you. It means choosing your response instead of surrendering it to anger. You can establish a boundary without shouting. You can disagree without insulting. You can reject an accusation without becoming defensive. You can leave a conversation without making a dramatic statement. These actions demonstrate strength because they show that your behavior is guided by judgment rather than impulse. Another reason emotional reactions are dangerous is that they reveal information. When someone discovers exactly what makes you angry, afraid, or insecure, they may be able to use that knowledge in future interactions. If a particular accusation always causes you to over-explain, someone can keep repeating it. If criticism makes you defensive, someone can use criticism to control the conversation. If rejection makes you desperate for approval, someone can create uncertainty and make you chase their attention. Emotional stability reduces this vulnerability. You do not have to hide every emotion, but you should not allow every person to control your emotional state. During difficult conversations, focus on the objective rather than the performance. You do not need to appear dominant. You need to understand what is happening and decide what outcome matters. If someone is trying to provoke you, ask whether responding will improve the situation. If the answer is no, silence may be more effective. If a response is necessary, make it brief and clear. Avoid adding unnecessary accusations or explanations that create new points of conflict. Pressure also creates urgency, and urgency can weaken judgment. Someone may demand an immediate answer because they want you to decide before you have time to think. You are allowed to slow things down. Say that you need time to consider the matter. Ask for clarification. Review the facts. A thoughtful response is often stronger than a fast one. This becomes especially important in negotiations workplace conflicts, relationships, and situations involving major decisions. Never let someone else's emotional speed determine your own. If they become louder, you do not have to become louder. If they become hostile, you do not have to become hostile. Your calmness can change the entire direction of the interaction. Emotional control also requires accepting that you will sometimes be misunderstood. You cannot control every person's interpretation of your words. If you constantly try to correct every misunderstanding, you will become exhausted and reactive. Explain when clarification genuinely matters, but recognize when further discussion will produce nothing useful. Your responsibility is to communicate clearly, not to control every response. With practice, pressure becomes a training ground for self-control. Each difficult conversation gives you an opportunity to practice patience, observation, and deliberate communication. Over time, you become less dependent on emotional impulses. You still feel anger, fear, embarrassment, or disappointment, but these emotions no longer automatically decide what you say. You gain the ability to pause, evaluate, and choose. That ability is one of the foundations of powerful communication, because the person who can remain mentally clear while others become emotional has more room to think, more options available, and far less reason to regret what they say. Make people feel understood, because one of the deepest human needs in communication is the desire to be seen, heard, and taken seriously. People may forget the exact words you used, but they often remember how they felt while speaking with you. If someone feels ignored, dismissed, or constantly interrupted, they naturally become defensive. If they feel that you genuinely understand their perspective, they become more willing to listen to yours. This does not mean agreeing with everyone or pretending to support opinions you do not share. Understanding and agreement are completely different things. You can understand someone's position while still disagreeing with their conclusion. The first step is learning to listen without immediately preparing your defense. When someone speaks, resist the urge to interrupt with your own experience. Instead, allow them to finish. Pay attention to what they are actually trying to communicate. Sometimes the words on the surface are not the real message. Someone may complain about a small problem when the deeper issue is that they feel ignored. Someone may become angry about a decision because they are afraid of losing control. Someone may criticize your idea because they feel uncertain about their own role. If you respond only to the visible words, you may miss the real concern. Understanding requires looking beneath the statement and asking what emotion, need, or expectation is behind it. One useful habit is to reflect back what you have heard. You might say, "So what concerns you most is the uncertainty," or "It sounds like you feel you were not included in the decision." This does not mean you are accepting blame or agreeing with their interpretation. You are simply demonstrating that you have heard them accurately. Once people feel understood, resistance often decreases because they no longer have to fight to make their perspective visible. This is especially valuable during disagreements. When two people are arguing, each person often becomes more interested in proving themselves than understanding the other. They repeat their own points louder and become increasingly frustrated when the other person does not accept them. The conversation becomes a contest. A better approach is to first identify the strongest part of the other person's perspective. Ask what they consider most important. Listen carefully to their answer. Then address the issue directly. This creates a more productive exchange because the other person no longer feels that you are ignoring them. Making people feel understood also requires avoiding unnecessary judgment. If someone shares a mistake, immediately telling them what they should have done can make them regret opening up. Sometimes people need to explain their experience before they are ready to hear advice. Listening does not require you to solve every problem. Sometimes your presence and attention are more valuable than an immediate solution. You should also avoid turning every conversation back toward yourself. If someone tells you about their difficulty, it can be tempting to respond with your own story. Sharing experiences can create connection, but if you constantly redirect the conversation to yourself, the other person may feel that their experience was merely an opportunity for you to speak. Let them have the moment. Ask thoughtful follow-up questions. Show genuine curiosity. This creates trust naturally. However, making people feel understood does not mean becoming a people pleaser. You should not agree simply to avoid discomfort. You can acknowledge someone's feelings while maintaining your own position. Saying, I understand why that upset you, does not mean saying you're completely right. Saying, I can see why you prefer that option, does not mean you must choose it. This distinction allows you to remain compassionate without sacrificing your judgment. The strongest communicators combine empathy with boundaries. They can listen deeply without losing themselves in another person's emotions. They can recognize another person's perspective without surrendering their own. They understand that communication becomes more effective when people feel respected rather than attacked. When you consistently make others feel heard, they become more open to hearing you in return. Your influence grows not because you force people to accept your ideas, but because you create an environment where genuine conversation becomes possible. You stop treating communication as a battle for dominance and begin treating it as an exchange where understanding comes before persuasion. That shift can transform difficult conversations, relationships, negotiations, and everyday interactions because people are far more willing to consider your words when they believe you have first taken their words seriously. No one's silence is more powerful than words because communication is not measured by how much you say, but by whether what you say actually serves a purpose. Many people believe they must always have the final word. When someone challenges them, they immediately respond. When someone insults them, they defend themselves. When someone misunderstands them, they explain repeatedly. When a conversation becomes uncomfortable, they keep talking simply to remove the silence. This habit can weaken their position because excessive words often reveal more than necessary. Silence creates a pause in which you can observe, think, and decide whether speaking will improve the situation. It is not about being passive or refusing to communicate. It is about understanding that every response has a cost and that some situations become worse when you continue adding words. One of the most useful moments for silence is when someone is deliberately trying to provoke you. A person may make a sarcastic comment, question your intelligence, criticize your choices, or say something designed to make you angry. Their real objective may not be the subject of the conversation at all. They may simply want a reaction. If you immediately become defensive, you give them exactly what they wanted. Your emotional response becomes the center of the conversation. Instead, pause. Look at what is happening rather than becoming part of it. You can decide whether the comment deserves an answer. Sometimes it does. If a serious boundary has been crossed, a clear and firm response may be necessary. But even then, the response does not need to be emotional. You can state the boundary and stop. Silence is also valuable when someone is demanding unnecessary explanations. You are not required to justify every decision to every person. If someone genuinely needs information because the decision affects them, explain what is relevant. But if someone simply wants to debate your choices, more explanation may give the argument endless fuel. You may explain one point, then another question appears, then another criticism, until you are defending your entire life. At some point, you must recognize that the conversation is no longer about understanding. It has become a demand for control. Silence or a brief statement can end that cycle. Another important use of silence is during negotiation. When you make an offer or state a position, resist the urge to immediately soften it because the other person becomes quiet. Many people become uncomfortable when there is a pause and start talking themselves into weaker positions. They offer unnecessary concessions, reveal their limits, or explain why their proposal is reasonable before the other person has even responded. Allow the other person time to think. Silence gives both sides room to process. It can prevent you from negotiating against yourself. Silence also helps you listen. After asking a meaningful question, do not immediately answer it for the other person. Give them space. They may reveal something important if you allow the pause to continue. People sometimes speak more honestly after the first few seconds because they realize you are genuinely waiting for their answer. In this way, silence becomes a tool for understanding rather than merely a method of withholding speech. You should also recognize the difference between strategic silence and avoidance. Silence is useful when it creates clarity, protects emotional control, or allows another person to speak. It becomes harmful when you use it to punish someone, manipulate them through uncertainty, or avoid necessary communication. If a relationship requires an honest conversation, refusing to speak does not create strength, it creates distance. The goal is not to become silent all the time. The goal is to become selective. Speak when your words clarify, protect, guide, or solve. Remain silent when speaking would only satisfy your ego, prolong an argument, or reveal information that does not need to be revealed. The more comfortable you become with silence, the less pressure you feel to prove yourself. You stop treating every disagreement as a battle. You stop chasing the final word. You become capable of letting someone else's statement exist without immediately fighting it. This creates a calmer form of confidence. Your words become more valuable because they are chosen rather than automatic. People begin noticing that when you speak, you usually have a reason. That is the real power of silence. It gives you control over when your voice matters most.